Hey, it's me, TB, and today I am bringing to you a video all about what I think are the best places to start if you want to get into horror movies, because I know that for a long time I didn't watch them because I had certain things I didn't want to watch or I was nervous about watching. So I have some movies here listed that I feel like are great entry points for a variety of reasons. I will go ahead and preface this by saying that a lot of these, at least like I think half of this list, are very like common / popular movies, but I feel like it's important to kind of like say that in this video or like mention them because you might know that they're popular, but you might not know like the level of like gore or like violence, etc. in them. So therefore you wouldn't know that they're like a good starting point. So I basically crafted this list and I kind of reorganized it a few times, and I already have a few like movies added to another version of this list in the future, but it is organized from what I feel like is probably the most accessible to the least accessible, and that is based on the idea of like mostly on the level of like gore or violence present, because I know that that's kind of like the big turnoff for a lot of people. So that is how I kind of organized my list, is based on the like level of like violence in them. So this is me editing. Just wanted to kind of say ahead of time that I do talk about spoilers here, but it's not like full-on plot spoilers so much as that it's me kind of like warning you about the potential gore or violence that comes up. So like if you are truly a newbie, you have time to like mentally prepare yourself for whenever something happens, so you aren't going into anything like not knowing the level of violence, if that makes sense. So like later on, there's a movie where someone's face gets cut off. I do kind of explain like that while that is intense, there is a scene, like once that scene is over, you do see that her face is very much like fine, because of how the effects weren't the greatest. So it's like therefore it isn't necessarily something I would call scary, because like it's scary for that short time, then it's kind of like not scary afterwards because it's very obviously fake, you know? And that is like a later movie on the list, so don't worry. But like even in the earlier entries, I do mention that whether or not anything even appears, because there are a few movies here where like you don't really see anything scary, like literally there's nothing to see. So I'll just like kind of like in your mind. So if you don't want any spoilers at all, I'm sorry, but I do think it's important to kind of like give a forewarning for a video like this, just so like you kind of know ahead of time what you are getting yourself into. So knowing that, and knowing that I talked about having a variety of popular movies present, you can probably guess what one of the first movies present are going to be, and that is the Blair Witch Project, released in 1999. If you didn't know, you don't see anything in this movie. There is obviously like, well, let me explain what it's about. Basically, it's a found footage film that is following this group of people that are kind of like doing a research film or something like that about the Blair Witch. That's like a local legend for them. And of course, you know, bad things happen because it is a found footage, etc., etc. However, it's like the first one on this list because it is very accessible, and like while there are like scary moments, I don't feel like there's anything that's like over the top scary. And like I knew going into it that you don't see anything, you don't see any monsters, any violence or anything. It's just a very like intense film, and there are like maybe two or three scenes that I feel like are actually kind of like scary. So therefore I feel like this is kind of like a great starting point because of the levels of violence, as well as like the very simplistic plot. These people could go out into the woods and then they can't find their way back out, and then bad things go down. It's very simple, and you kind of already know how it's going to end because of the fact that it is a found footage movie. So that is number one. So next up is Paranormal Activity. This was released in 2007, I think, and this is on the list at this point for the same reasons pretty much, and that you don't see really anything, and there's only violence, very intense violence towards the very end. So in theory, if you wanted to, you could just close your eyes and be fine. Like, I watched it for the first time this year, and I felt it held up pretty well. Like, I thought there were some pretty like scary moments, as well as I enjoyed following our two main characters. I'm pretty sure there's also a found footage. Yeah, it is. But we're following this couple who decide to set up a camera in their house because there have been like some like strange things going on, and the wife mentions that this kind of happens fairly often with her for whatever reason, and then plot stuff happens. So yeah, very well known. You might have actually already seen this, but still I feel like it's a pretty good like mention for like a beginner place in horror, because like again, it's very like low violence. It's pretty much just like tension and like ghost spookiness, which again, you don't see anything. It's kind of like all like implied because the ghosts or don't even appear on camera. So like you should be fine. It's more so just like creepiness, to be honest. So next up is the first of like the more underrated / unknown films that I feel like would be like a very good beginner place, you know? And that is, I think it's pronounced V, because that's how they say it in the movie itself. But it's released in 1967, and this was released in the USSR. Okay, so this one is on this list for kind of like the same reasons. This one is probably like less going on, pretty much. It's just that the sequences towards the end can be kind of like scary. It's not necessarily violent. There's violence towards the beginning, but it's like you don't see blood or anything, I don't think. This is probably like the most intense so far. Oh, there's that. But in this movie, we are following a young priest who, after he ends up killing a witch, he gets asked to preside over this young girl's funeral, and it turns out that she was a witch that he killed. So he has to stand guard over her body for 3 days, and each night things get increasingly crazy for him. This film is very short. It's 77 minutes, so you should be able to take it out in like an afternoon, you know? And also that it is very slow to start. Like you don't actually see him start his first night until I think like halfway through. So it is kind of slow, but I feel like the first half is like interesting enough to get you invested. As a whole, the final day is like so fucking good that I feel like it's just worth watching, just because like how good it looks for a movie released in 1967. It's kind of like crazy to think about, because that scene just looks so fucking good. So we're back to the popular things. And this one might be controversial, but I feel like after I explain my thoughts, it'll make more sense. But this is Ringu, or The Ring. This is the original Japanese version, because I watched this and I did not find it scary at all. That's why it's on here. It's still like solid, you know, but it isn't like over the top scary. Like, you know, The Ring's whole gimmick is that, you know, the girl crawls out of the TV. Congratulations, you know, the scariest part ever, and you're kind of like done, you know? It's literally the scariest part that happens in this movie, and you already know that, so you're kind of set to go, you know? Outside of that, there isn't like a lot of like intense spookiness. It's more so just like investigation stuff going on. So basically, this journalist finds out about this videotape that after someone watches it, they die in a few days. So of course she investigates and she watches the tape, and then she's trying to figure out what to do, like where the curse came from and how to stop it, pretty much. Like again, it isn't like awful or bad, it's just kind of like, it's like so hyped up that you probably think it's a lot scarier than it actually is. I've heard the US remake is actually scary, so maybe stay away from that one, but the Japanese version, like the original, you should be pretty fine. Because again, it's literally just like the scariest part is just like her coming out of the TV, and like that's basically it. Like there isn't a whole lot otherwise, you know? So yeah, that is Ringu. And our next entry will put us halfway through this list already. So again, we are on a very popular movie, and that is Psycho, released in 1960. So this one could probably be like your first horror movie and you would still be fine. I think this is probably my first one as well, or like at least one of my first ones. So I do feel like this one kind of functions was like a introduction fine on its own, you know? So this movie is kind of weird to explain because of like a twist that happens part of the way through. But you are following our main character, Marion, who decides to take some money and like kind of go on the lam from her job. And while doing that, she decides to stop at this little motel on the side of the road, and she meets a very strange man named Norman Bates, and things kind of spiral out from there. There is the very famous shower scene from this movie, which you've probably seen or heard or seen it parodied in other media. So like you probably already know that part, which in my opinion is probably like the most horror specific part. If you've ever seen that scene, you probably know the most bloodiest part. So you're good. But I do feel with Psycho, you have kind of like waited for it to get started because it is slower. But again, I feel like Marion is just a very interesting character. I felt very attached to Marion right away, so I kind of was okay with following her slowly at first. But yeah, just keep it in mind that this movie is kind of slower. So yeah, there are actually a few deaths in this, but again, they're not heavily violent because like while there is the shower scene, it's kind of like shot in a way that it's very obvious that she isn't being stabbed because it was 1960. The tech wasn't there to like have like, you know, a very convincing stabbing, you know? So while it is a great scene, you know, it isn't necessarily scary if you look very closely. So we're back to the very random movies, and this is The Rope Curse, released in 2018. So this one might actually be probably one of the more violent ones, but I do kind of have a little loophole for that. So in this movie, we are following our main characters, who are filming a ceremony that involves kind of disposing of rope that was used in a hanging so like bad spirits can't come back. So while doing that and filming it, a ghost starts to harass them and starts killing off random people. So I have to kind of figure out why and how to stop it. So while there are lots of deaths in this, there is the little caveat that you don't see any rope. It's all just them acting like they're being strangled by rope. So that's my little loophole for me. Like, technically, they are being strangled, and it is intense, but like you don't actually see them being fucked up, you know, because there is like no actual rope around their neck. It's all just kind of like pretend. Personally, I really like this movie, but it has very low ratings otherwise. So probably like if you're apprehensive, maybe skip this one. But for me, it worked. I had fun. I like our main characters. I thought the deaths, while like obviously very like pretend because there is like no rope choking them, I did not notice that until the very end, where I realized that it was just all acting and like sound effects. So, you know, kudos to them, because obviously they sold it well enough for me to like not notice it until then. So good for them, you know. So now we're on to our final popular movie on this list, and that is the first Halloween, released in 1978. So listen, hear me out. This is on this list because it's kind of like the same reasons, but by this point we are kind of getting into the more like gruesome / gory movies, but not really, because in this Halloween you don't see a lot of like blood at all really, and because of that it's not as violent as you're probably expecting. The most violent parts are probably Laurie's final confrontation with Michael, as well as the opening scene. So if you can make it past the opening, you're pretty fine. There are, I think, like 3 or 4 other deaths besides that opening one, and while intense, they aren't necessarily bloody or gory, so there isn't that to worry about. Like, while Michael is probably very scary and intimidating, it just isn't for me, so maybe that's why I think it's a very good like beginner place, because I just think he's hot. It's like he's not scary to me, you know, but he might be terrifying for you. But again, like there's no real like extreme gore in this, you know, so you should be mostly fine. Especially if you intend to watch these in order, you should be pretty fine by this point to horror. Like it's rare to find someone that doesn't like this movie. So like as a whole, probably one of the better places to start. I feel like as a whole, that's why there's a lot of like popular movies on this list, because like they're popular because like they're good without being like over the top gory. So therefore a lot of people watch these as like their first movies, and therefore they kind of like build this level of popularity because like it's so accessible for other people to watch, you know? So that's my excuse. So yeah. And I totally forgot to explain what Halloween is about, so let me go do that. So in Halloween, you're following our character Laurie Strode, who I think on like Halloween night, Michael Myers escapes from his little asylum after killing his sister like a few years prior, and he goes back to the old house where he finds Laurie. And on that night, her friends and her are like babysitting, and Michael hunts them down one by one. Summary done. So this next one is like kind of well known in like certain circles, but like not well known enough to be like very popular, and that is Eyes Without a Face, released in 1960. So this one is kind of like bridging the gap between more classical movies and horror. However, it is like this low on the list because there's like one scene that's very like intense, and I wouldn't want to like throw you into that to have me like build up some like tolerance to gore, you know? This movie is about there is an accident ends up disfiguring our main character, Christiane, I think you'd say, or Christiane, but she is disfigured and she wears a mask everywhere, and her father ends up learning a lot about skin grafting in order to fix this, and it sends him down a very questionable path. So there are kind of like 2 things that might be kind of like a warning to like not watch this, you know? And that is that there is like implied animal experimentation. You don't like see anything, I don't think, but it is like heavily implied. But they do get their revenge, we shall say. And also, our main character, as you can probably guess from our little blurb, there is a lot of like skin grafting going on. So there is one scene where we do see someone's face get cut off. It is very intense when you watch it in progress, but once they kind of like take the face off, you realize that her face is like still there. They just kind of covered it with like jam. So it kind of like immediately kind of dissolves any like horror or like tension kind of, because it's like very obviously just like a jam on this woman's face. Like it's literally just like jam. So not really scary anymore, but still very intense when you're watching it for the first time. So that's pretty much like the one moment. It's kind of like very intense. It's a very solid movie, very critically acclaimed. I thought it was very good, but not necessarily like full levels of horror, you know. There is that one scene as mentioned before, but otherwise it's a pretty chill movie. It's very dark as fuck. Pretty much that one scene's very like fucked up. Besides that's more so like a drama of sorts. And the ending is very satisfying. So, you know, win-win, yeah? So next up is another underrated movie. And hear me out. You will see these marketed everywhere as a slasher. It is not a slasher, so do not go in expecting that at all, because it is just not. I have no idea why they thought to market it like that, because it totally fucked them over. But the movie is 30 Miles from Nowhere, and this was released in 2018. So this movie, we are following a group of college friends that are going to visit their friend's widow, I guess, because their other college friend has just committed suicide. So they're going to visit for his funeral and like stay for a day or two, you know, pay respects, you know. And while there, very weird things start to happen, and it's brought into question whether or not the friend actually killed himself. So this one, everyone fucking hates the movie, but I love it so much. So I'm a little bit biased, I will say that. And there is a suicide. You do see him commit suicide on screen. You don't see him like fully like die on camera, but you do see like pretty close up to that cutoff point. So warning for that. There's also a lot of like animal corpses, and it is said that there's a lot of like wild dogs, but to me they look more like deer corpses. Personally, that did not offend me or like trigger me or anything. So go into that expecting kind of like you will see animal corpses and like some gore, but it's not like anything overly intense, you know. It's kind of like more slower paced movie, and that there are like scary, like spooky moments throughout, but it really is going in the last like third or so. And that's why I really like it. It's such like a very good payoff for everything you've experienced so far up to this point, you know. And it brings up a very minor detail early on, important plot moment. So I really like that as well. It's a very good movie, but it's not a slasher. So yeah, it's good, but like I have no idea why they marketed themselves as a slasher, because it just isn't. Even the poster looks very slashery. It isn't. It's just a horror movie following these friends who visit their friend's widow and spooky things go down. Like that's basically it. It is very good, but like temper your expectations, you know? So this last one is probably the most violent. There's like a caveat to that violent, and that is One Cut of the Dead, released in 2017. So we are following a camera crew and like basically like a film crew that are filming a very low budget zombie movie at this abandoned Japanese facility from World War II. And while making this movie, real zombies attack them. It sounds very simple, and the worst part is probably, like the most goriest part, I mean, it's probably the first like third. So just like handle that, and the other 2/3 kind of like balance out that first third. It's very like hard to explain because of how this movie is structured. But like, trust me, it's very well worth it. The most intense scenes are probably the first like third, but because of like how it's a low budget film, I have no idea how spooky it like, or how like spooked it'll make you. Like it is obvious it's very low budget, but you know, different strokes, you know. But yeah, honestly, I feel like if you have made it up to this point, have any of you watched everything in order, or at least close to an order, maybe even like half of them, you should be fine for the gore present in this one. So there you go. I did recommend this one almost purely because of how the first third is the worst. So it's kind of like you're very like tense. The latter 2/3 kind of like allow you to unwind. That makes sense. And that is one of my favorite movies of all time. So if you don't like it, don't tell me, you know. But yeah, that is my list. And what I think are probably, you know, 10 good places to start for horror, preferably in order, because again, I did make this list purely based on like how gore kind of scales in them, with 1 being the least gory and 10 being the most gory. Of course, this is kind of all subject to personal opinion, so people might disagree with me on this list, but you know, that is why it's my list. You can make your own list, you know? So yeah, comment down below if you agree or disagree, or what you think would make a good like a beginner place for horror fans, you know? So yeah, thank you for watching. If you like the video, subscribe, like, share, all of that, and hopefully I will see you next week.